Good evening, Philip DeFranco and the DeFranco Nation Movie Club. It seems that it's time for There Will Be Blood's review. Now, I thought that this movie was going to be a lot gorier than it actually was. But before I get started, I do have a few things to say. Number one, I recommend for our next movie club, we watch 7 Days in May. I think at this point in time, especially with everything that's happening with Syria and with America's position in the world, it would be good to watch a movie like this, as it has a lot of good messages for everyone, even foreigners like myself. And secondly, Philip, I heard about your little problem. Don't worry, I've sent some of my people to take care of it. Don't worry, and again, don't worry, don't ask any questions. We're not going to kill him. We just want to talk to him. That being said, let's move on. Now, this movie is about ruthless oil man Daniel Plainview and his quest to become the richest man in America. If only he'd heard of the Goulettes. Just been told by my lawyers that I cannot mention that name on camera ever again. This is a movie about pride, money, achieving your goals, and what some people are willing to do to get there. This movie is what Blood Diamonds would be if we were looking at it from the perspective of the ruthless, top-down guerrilla warfare in general, where he has this drive and this ambition and that he wants to be king. And I think that's exactly what we see in Daniel Plainview. This movie and the character of Daniel are very interesting because in modern times, as despicable as some of his business practices are, for example, shortchanging people when he buys land, or portraying himself as a religious person when he really isn't, or any of these tricks that we normally see and denounce in politicians or CEOs or other leading figures in society. We have to understand, in his day, without that ruthlessness, that cutthroat nature, many of the things that made the foundation for the way we live our lives today could never have been built. There are two kinds of businessmen. There are honest businessmen, and then there's dishonest businessmen. An honest businessman is somebody you want to run your company, but a dishonest businessman is the one that you want to get things done, because this is the man who will lie and cheat and steal and push and drive to get that goal. The honest businessman, he's there to make a profit, but he's not interested in any of the underhanded practices that go along with the push forward. And sometimes you need those underhanded practices with the push forward. I mean, look at Thomas Edison. Patents be damned, he was going to make all the dollars on all of the inventions that he stole. Yes, we are going there. But because of what he did, today we now have LED TVs that are really just large mounted computers on walls. And we now can carry every song that was ever made on a little thing about this size. I mean, the future is insane when you think about it from those points of view. And really, you kind of see his place based on what needed to be done and the goals he needed to accomplish. Daniel's character is not a bad person. At least I don't think he is. Here's what I think happened. I think that he even states in the movie, he's a plain-spoken, ruthless person whose ambition is to see no one else succeed. And as such, this makes him a ruthless businessman. But because his entire focus is making money and on his business, his ruthlessness translates into the rest of his life. It's just that he's too good of a businessman to be anything else outside of being a businessman. He's got that drive. He wants to succeed above all other people. He wants to get that money. He wants to live in that big house. He wants to be the king of the castle. But other than that, he doesn't have any goals. He doesn't have any goals outside of being the best. And that really translates into how he treats other people. If you look at his son, when his son can no longer be useful to him, as much as he loves him, he sends him away in favor of his brother so that they can continue to present this family-friendly image of their business. And then when his brother betrays him and he takes action against his brother and his brother is no longer useful to him, he then brings his son back. And even in the scene where we see him being baptized, the only reason that he is becoming a part of the church of the third revelation is so that he can get a lease to build a pipeline through this particular person's land in order so that he can get the contract with Union Oil and make all the money. I think that this is emphasized particularly in the second to last scene where his son, who now that they've grown up and now that they have the large manor house and now that they have all the money and he's there sitting there writing checks all day, his son, who's basically grown bored of this life and wants to go back into the field, basically tells his father, look, I would like to do something more than simply write checks. I'd like to go back into the field. I'd like to start my own company. I'd like to build from the ground. I'd like to build something from the ground up again. And he, again, what does he say? He sees him now as a competitor. And even though this is not what's happening, he's not trying to compete with his father. He's going to be in a completely different country, Mexico. And it really cuts him up. You can see that without his son, he doesn't really have anything. I mean, sure, he has money, he has this big house, he has all the luxuries of the modern day, if you could call it that. I mean, and what does he do? He ends up sleeping in the gutter, literally. And figuratively, depending on how you see it. I mean, I think that this is emphasized particularly in the second to last scene where his son, who now that they've grown up and now that they have the large manor house and now that they have all the money and he's there sitting there writing checks all day, his son, who's basically grown bored of this life and wants to go back into the field, basically tells his father, look, I would like to do something more than simply write checks. I'd like to go back into the field. I'd like to start my own company. I'd like to build from the ground. I'd like to build something from the ground up again. And he, again, what does he say? He sees him now as a competitor. And even though this is not what's happening, he's not trying to compete with his father. He's going to be in a completely different country, Mexico. And it really cuts him up. You can see that without his son, he doesn't really have anything. I mean, sure, he has money, he has this big house, he has all the luxuries of the modern day, if you could call it that. I mean, and what does he do? He ends up sleeping in the gutter, literally. I mean, the fact that Daniel gets so upset and he literally ends up sleeping in a gutter is indicative of how much he loves his son, especially with all the flashbacks and all the memories that we see as he makes his way down towards the gutter. I just had this brainwave. Daniel Plainview is a lot like Walter White. Now follow me here. Here we have two men. They're both very purpose-driven. Walter is very purpose-driven to make money for his family. They're both driven by money, actually. One's purpose-driven to get money for his family. The other one is purpose-driven to get money for himself, but his family is very important to him. We see that with his brother betraying him and what he does to him. Even though he says, well, you know what, I'm not here to hurt you, I'm your friend, he still takes action against him. In the end, when Walter and Daniel both lose essentially their families, if you watch the last episode of Breaking Bad, I don't feel bad about spoiling it, because that's just the person I am. But if you watch the last episode of Breaking Bad, and if you see the progression where he loses his family, all they both have left now is their pride and their money. and they both exercise it in the end. Here's something that bothered me after the point of the accident happening to HW. Daniel is clearly a very intelligent man, and his son can read. We know this because we see him reading the diary. Why did it not occur to either of them, or to anybody around, to the doctor, to the school teacher, to whoever was there, to give HW a piece of slate and some chalk? And in that way, whenever Daniel wanted to communicate with his son, or whenever his son wanted to communicate with Daniel, all that they would have to do, well, his son could talk still, but all he would have to do is he would write on the slate, and in that way they can get past that hearing problem. I mean, he knows his son is deaf, and he knows that his son will probably never recover. We learn that later on. But that would have been such an easy workaround. And it's not like it would have affected the movie that much. I mean, I don't know. Those are just my feelings on it. That a piece of chalk could have solved a lot of their problems. All in all, I give this movie a 7.8 out of 10. I think it's a great movie. I think it's well on its way to becoming a classic. I would definitely watch it again. And I will see you for the next movie club. Bye, guys. Now, this movie contains a very famous line, I drink your milkshake. And I never really understood what they were talking about. Even when I watched the scene, it was only after watching the entire movie and learning about Daniel's personality that the scene makes sense once it's in the context of the entire movie. We know that Daniel puts his pride first, and all these years later, even after he's brought his son back, even after he's made all of his money, even after everything that's transpired, he still feels that he needs to avenge himself for the insult that was heaped upon him in the Church of the Third Revelation all those years ago. And he does essentially. Now, while I'm not saying that it's a good thing that he murdered him, I think what this scene is trying to show us is the sum of his personality. After all this time, after everything he's been through, he is still the ruthless businessman he was when he began. In fact, he's probably even more ruthless because he's accomplished all his goals, and now all that's left is his pride. As an actor, I love Daniel Day-Lewis. This simply shows his range. If you look at him in There Will Be Blood, and then you look at him in Lincoln, you see some similarities with the sympathetic nature of the character and his ability to make you see things from the character's point of view, despite how lovable the character might be, such as Lincoln, or in this case, how ruthless and prideful the character might be, such as Daniel Plainview.